Welcome to our State of the County. Morgan Gache here with the Calaveras County Chamber of Commerce. And to our community and our residents, thank you so much for joining in and tuning in with us. It's an honor and a privilege because I get to sit here next to our Congressman McClintock, and I wanted to take a moment just to have a chat because so much is going on right now in not just our county, not just our state, but federally. And so I'd love to have this conversation and hear your thoughts. You are our 4th Congressional District legislator. Over the past month, we have had an incredible amount of smoke-filled skies, and it's been scary. It's been devastating to the businesses that are already experiencing closure due to COVID-19. And so I'd like to hear from you, what's being done at the federal level to help mitigate and help bring resources to California at yet again another fire season that's devastating to your constituents and to the businesses in your district?
Well, first of all, this is a preventable crisis. Excess timber will come out of the forest one way or the other. It will either be carried out or it will burn out, but it comes out. We used to carry it out, and the result was we had a thriving local economy, about 100 and I believe it was 67 sawmills throughout the Sierra Nevada of California, a tremendous driver of the economy. We had foresters go into our forests, mark off surplus timber, then we auctioned it off to timber companies. They removed that timber and paid us for it. 25% of those revenues went to local governments directly. The other 75% we were able to put back into forest management through the U.S. Forest Service. But in the 1970s, we began passing laws that have made the harvesting of surplus timber endlessly time-consuming and ultimately cost-prohibitive. We've seen about an 80% decline in timber harvested off the Sierra since 1980, while we've seen a concomitant increase in acreage destroyed by fire. It is not complicated. An untended forest is just like an untended garden. It will grow and grow and grow until it chokes itself to death. It becomes susceptible to disease, pestilence, drought, and ultimately catastrophic wildfire. We formed the U.S. Forest Service nearly a century ago expressly to prevent that cycle of destruction that would destroy forests for hundreds of years at a time. We began scientifically managing our forests. We began matching the density of the timber to the ability of the land to support it. And through all of those years, we saw a dramatic reduction in the kind of catastrophic fires that we had seen prior to those days and that we're seeing again. But those laws in the 1970s, laws like the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act, brought that era of management to a standstill. And we're dealing with the result today. You go back prior to forest management, you'll see that we had the same kind of destruction across the state. We were able to bring that destruction to just a fraction of the acreage, but it's going back up again, and the reason is because we've abandoned those policies of scientific forest management. So what to do? Well, it's not all that complicated. Get the government out of the way so that we can, again, manage our forest properly. We were able to do that through my legislation, which was signed into law by President Obama as part of the WIN Act of 2016. What that does is to grant a categorical exclusion for forest thinning projects from NEPA. That has taken the amount of time necessary to process applications for more than 4 years down to about 4 months. The environmental reports have gone from about 800 pages to a dozen pages or so, and the costs have come down dramatically. Unfortunately, in order to counter left-wing opposition in the Senate, we had to confine the provisions of that bill only to the Tahoe Basin. The good news is that it is working and working well. I was just up at a site where we're going to be doing about 60,000 acres of forest treatment, including 20,000 acres of forest thinning. As a direct result of this new authority, we were able to get into law. But it only applies to the Tahoe Basin. I have introduced legislation to take these now proven principles and extend them throughout the U.S. land holdings. Unfortunately, we now can't even get a hearing in the House Natural Resources Committee. That's an issue that will be decided by the election.
Moving forward then, what is it? We're coming from the perspective of business owners. And I kind of want to segue this question because it's related to it. We've had impacts of power shutdowns, and last year experiencing what that did to Paradise. And power is an issue, energy is an issue, and also our depleting water resources. And this isn't just for business owners, this is your constituents all over Calaveras County. But what is being done to conserve, and what is being done to help us, again, to stay away from more of the fire and loss of energy and water?
Well, with respect to energy, a generation ago, we were generating power in such enormous amounts and at such a cheap price. There was serious talk in many communities about doing away with electricity meters because electricity had become too cheap and too plentiful to bother to measure. But once again, we saw left-wing policies come in with the environmental movement that has driven out the low-cost forms of electricity in favor of the highest cost and most unreliable forms of electricity. Wind and solar are the most expensive possible ways of producing electricity. These are not new technologies. Photovoltaic cells have been around since the 1820s, and in more than a century and a half, 2 centuries now, of research and development, we've not yet come up with a more expensive way of producing electricity. So what are the state policies on this? To heavily subsidize and promote wind and solar power, and at the expense of what? Natural gas, hydroelectricity, and nuclear power, which are among the cheapest ways of generating electricity, along with clean coal. So we have phased out all of the cheap and reliable forms of electricity generation and replaced them with the most expensive and most unreliable kinds of electricity generation. Now that's had 2 huge impacts. First of all, it has required the utilities, under mandate from the state of California, to divert enormous amount of resources from the cheap generation of electricity, the most expensive. That means they don't have the money to do all of the fireproofing of lines that they otherwise would have done, because that money instead has gone into massive subsidies for wind and solar. So they've not been able to bury power lines. And at the same time, our bad forest management practices, which we've just discussed, have turned our forests into tinderboxes. I mean, a typical acre in the Sierra will support between 10 and 100 trees. The average tree density in the Sierra is now 266 trees per acre, because of our neglect of good forest management. So you have tinderboxes now where you used to have well-managed, resilient forests, and you have a drain of resources that could have and should have and would have been going to fireproofing lines. It's interesting, California is the only state that has this problem, and now we have the irony of a state that boasts of all of its wind power cannot deliver electricity on windy days. So that's a big part of the problem. And then on top of that, wind and solar are highly unreliable. Sun goes down or a cloud passes over a solar array, it stops producing electricity. Wind suddenly falls off, particularly during a heat wave. Windmills stop generating electricity. Well, it's an integrated grid, which means you've got to constantly match the amount of that's going onto the grid with the amount that's being drawn off of the grid. Otherwise, the grid collapses. So what that means is you still have to have gas-fired plants running at what they call it ready reserve. So you're burning gas, you're turning the turbines, but you're not producing any electricity for that moment in time when a cloud passes over the solar array or the sun sets or the wind drops off, so that you can immediately replace that lost power. So in a sense, we're paying for electricity twice. That's a reason why Californians pay among the highest electricity prices in the country these days, because we're paying for it over and over again. But what that also means is that we cannot delay. The reliability of our delivery is now open to grave question. And when we have a heat wave like the one we've just gone through, once again, we can't guarantee enough electricity to keep your refrigerator running.
Congressman, thank you so much for meeting with me. Any parting thoughts for residents, businesses in Calaveras County that you'd like to share?
Well, there's a story that Abraham Lincoln once told of a potentate who called in the wisest men from his kingdom and tasked them with the responsibility to come up with a motto that expressed the universal truth of human existence. He says, "You'll know you've found it because it will be something that is as comforting in times of trial as it is humbling in times of triumph." Those wise men went away and after many months returned with these words, "This too shall pass away. This too shall pass." That's the good news I can offer in all of this. It will pass a lot faster if the American people stand up for their constitutional rights, for their historic freedom, and for the exercise of simple common sense in the exercise of public policy.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. It's an honor.
Thank you.